What's up YouTube? My name is Caden and you're watching Gas at Garage. Today, I am going to be showing you my homemade Go Ped right here. I'm going to be explaining how I built it and telling you a little bit of the backstory on it, and then I'm going to take it for a ride. Alright guys, so this is my homemade Go Ped gas-powered scooter with a 80cc engine on it that I put together about a year and a half before I even started this YouTube channel. So this was actually my first project where I designed and built my own custom frame, and it was really the first project where I started getting into custom fabrication stuff. So what this is basically an old stunt scooter that I chopped the back wheel off of, and I had a whole bunch of this angle iron laying around. So I welded this mess together to kind of make a makeshift frame. Now, the reason this all looks so bad and janky right here is because it wasn't until after I started building this that I realized that this part is aluminum and this is obviously steel. So I didn't know it at the time, but you can't really weld steel to aluminum very well, especially with a flux core MIG welder, which I made this with, and I actually am still making stuff with. So I attempted to weld it together right there, but it didn't really work out too well. So I added this piece right here. And what this is basically like a little hook that goes through a hole that's drilled in the frame of the scooter. And it basically kind of helps keep this part from sliding out of this. And then the rest of this keeps it from flexing. So it's super janky and it looks horrible, but it works and it stays together, which is really all I'm going for with this project. And then the back wheel, what I basically did was I went to Tractor Supply and bought this little lawnmower tire that just has some bearings in it. It's just meant to be like a little roller tire. Probably not even for a lawnmower. I'm assuming it's just probably for like a little garden wagon or something, because it just has some bearings in it. It's not meant to be a drive wheel. But what I did to turn it into a drive wheel was I had drilled the holes through the wheel so I could put bolts in it. And then on this side, if you can kind of see it down in there, it's really hard to see. But basically what I did was I welded a gigantic washer onto it, and I drilled holes in the edges of the washer to put the bolts through all the way to the other side to hold the sprocket on. And what the washer is for is basically to provide a plate or a hub to mount this sprocket onto. And then I welded the washer to the piece that sticks out of the wheel. I got that sprocket on there with some bolts and quite a few spacers to make everything stable and square. And then I threw the chain on, put a bolt through it, and I cut up a copper pipe for some wheel spacers there. So there's quite a lot of jank going on here, but it does work. And the chain actually scrubs the frame right there. So whenever you hit this this brake right here, this part of the chain tightens up and it rubs the frame. But it's kind of self-clearing over time. So when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do for brakes, one thought I had was to use the sprocket as a brake disc and mount a caliper on there. But obviously there's barely a finger width of room between the sprocket and the tire, so obviously that wouldn't work. Another idea I had was to actually mount a brake disc on this side of the wheel, but there really wasn't enough room to do that. So the only other option that I think I had seen someone else do before on an old go-kart was to have a band brake around the clutch right here. because the outside piece of this clutch is directly tied to the chain. So when the chain moves, this outer disc on the clutch moves as well. So if you can stop this from moving, you will stop the tire from rotating. So I kind of threw together this little heel pedal that presses down on the brake band right here, and this thing will actually lock up the rear tire, surprisingly. So the brakes work surprisingly well on this thing. Now, as for the engine, this was actually originally the engine that was on that mini bike. And that mini bike was my best friend's mini bike that he had a Predator 212 on, and it was an absolute monster. But eventually he just didn't need the frame anymore. He eventually got a little ATV that he threw that 212 on. And then the engine in it right now is actually the original engine out of my drag bike. But anyway, this 80cc engine was the stock engine that came on this Motovox here. I think it's like 3 horsepower, maybe 4, but it's an 80cc 4-stroke engine. So for a mini bike or a go-kart, it's not crazy powerful, but for this thing, it's actually pretty terrifying. This thing actually goes about 35 or 36 miles an hour, which doesn't really seem that fast, but on this thing, it's absolutely terrifying, especially since I have that tiny little wheel on the front. So this thing is kind of awkward and sketchy to ride, but it's still pretty fun though. And then since I didn't have the original gas tank for it, I made my custom mount right here, which doesn't look the greatest, but it does the job. And then I bought this cheap little fuel tank and then hooked it up to the fuel line and to the carburetor. And then for the air filter, yes, it's very janky, but again, I was lacking the proper parts, so I kind of had to improvise there. But surprisingly, this thing actually runs great. It does need a new clutch though, because the clutch has this issue where as soon as you start the engine up, the clutch vibrates really, really bad because there's some parts in it that are just loose. So I need a new clutch, but it is still rideable. And the way I have the throttle hooked up, it makes this thing to where it's pretty much degoverned because it's kind of overpowering or bypassing the governor. So this thing is probably way faster than it should be. And then over here, we have my horrible, janky throttle. It's literally just the throttle cable and hose clamped onto the steering neck. And then you kind of reach your hand around like this and pull the throttle like that. It's not the best thing, but it works. And then back here, you can see it. You can see it working. So enough talk about this thing. Let's go take it for a ride. All right, so I'm gonna put some gas in this thing, throw a helmet on, and take this sketchy thing for a ride. Gotta throw a little bit of WD-40 in the center of this clutch because it vibrates really bad because the pieces in here are just worn out. And WD-40 doesn't really hurt the performance of the clutch too much. On a high performance thing, it probably would, but this thing's just like 3 horsepower, so it doesn't matter a whole lot. That's what it does. So I kind of have to start it and just go. That that scraping sound you're hearing when I'm stopping is the chain rubbing on that one little part of the frame that I talked about earlier. So I'm going to bring the camera up to the road and do a couple of flybys. Alright, so that was kind of an interesting drive on this thing because the engine felt like it was kind of losing power, and I think it's because my fuel line is popped off of the fuel tank. So I have to go grab a new fuel line, mainly because that one is starting to dry rot and it's gotten really hard. And then I'll do a little burnout on this thing to end the video with. Alright, I got the new fuel line on right here, so now I'm going to try and do a burnout. And there went the tire. I was planning on getting a new tire for this thing anyway, so whatever. Yep, right there. Well, that's the end of that for today, I guess. So this engine started running poorly for some reason when I was riding it. It probably just needs the carburetor cleaned out, although it may have started to suck in this. That's actually probably why it was running bad. Yeah, you can see that right there. Started to kind of eat this up a little bit, but can't really ride this thing anymore now because I popped the tire. But kind of a cool burnout though. So thank y'all for watching this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video.